All right. Hello. Hello, I11. Hello, Robin. Hey, Roberto. Steve. Nice to see you. We are back up this week. I think we took 2 weeks off. I was traveling 1 week, and then the next week I really was not feeling up to it. How are y'all doing this morning? It's a little bit like wet in San Francisco today. Hey, Xavier. How's it going? It's got that like sticky wetness vibe going on in San Francisco. Not a huge fan of it this morning. So the release candidates have started going out. We are on RC2, probably RC video lag. Video lag is in like the stream or like. It's looking good in OBS for me. Here is 5x5. What is 5x5? I don't get it. A bit like where you're from. Cool. Thank you, Dima. Appreciate that. Hello, Ram. So the RCs are out. I think the first thing I'll do is go back to the Bevy examples that we were working on the other week and get those up to the RC, because not a lot should have changed. But we'll see. I have too many folders named in progress stuff. Is active is the one I'm using now? Yeah. I have the equivalent of like .docx.pdf.doc in my active folders. Video quality 5, audio quality 5. I hope that's out of 5. 5/5 is old radio language used by plane pilots and stuff. Roger. Oh, okay. Got you. So like 5/5 is like fine, like everything's okay. Got it. That I did not know. Let's see. I have the code over here. So there is a migration guide up. It is a draft, so it does not have everything quite yet. But the point of the migration guide and the draft page is so that it's there for people who are trying to use the releases. And then it'll be done by the time it's actually time to release it. Okay, so we're in 0.15 dev. What do we do? RC. I forget if we use the dots or not. -RC.2. Yeah. 0.15.0 RC.2 features, yada yada. No longer patch, or at least comment out the patch. And then go through each of these examples and make sure they run. Yeah, over and then over and out are two that I'm aware of. Is my shell config public anywhere? You want nice looking ls and error commands too. Yeah, but that's actually really easy. assuming that you're willing to switch shells, because the reason my shell looks like that is because I use new shell, where all of those kinds of things are built in. So I actually don't have to configure a whole bunch of stuff. And you won't need to look at my config. I would suggest, if you're going to try to use new shell, to use it as like a secondary shell for a little bit. Maybe make it your primary and have the one you're currently using as a backup for a little while. But I've been using new shell for I want to say like 2 years now, primarily. I don't actually know when I switched over completely. I don't remember. But it is very, very nice. I like it a lot. And I'm currently using Alacrity for the terminal. And Starship. Yeah, so the emulator I'm using is Alacrity. Right? So this is the window and stuff around it. That's the reason I don't have like a title bar here or anything like that. And then the shell that's running inside of it is new shell. I think it is these days. I don't remember offhand. POSIX compliance intentionally optimizes. Yeah, so maybe not everything, but has some POSIX compliance in it. One thing I'll mention is that it, if you ever need to call out to stuff, like here's the LS that's built in, and here's the LS externally, like the LS bin or whatever. So you can always get to anything, even if it's named the same thing inside of new shell, by prefixing with a caret. I will say long time ago, like 0.3 or something like that, I definitely had more issues with compatibility, but I think we're on like 0.9 something right now. And I've had significantly fewer, like 0 issues recently. So unless you're doing something specific. And the nice thing about shells is you can always just jump into a different one. So like if I wanted to do Z shell for some reason, now suddenly I'm on Z shell, right? Just by typing ZSH, and now I'm back to new shell. So like, I don't know. Like when I didn't know shells as well, I think it was more of a big deal to switch. But these days I find it trivial to drop down to something else. And back into what I wanted. What do you actually use to have the windows in the grid like that? It is Yabai, like Hukasi said. Yabai is this tiling window manager. I basically only use it for this binary space partitioning because it works really well for stream. Like rather than having these all like stacked up and stuff, it works really well for videos too. Because alternatively, I would have to do that in like in DaVinci or something, and that just sounds like a huge pain. So I optimize for doing simpler editing flows. Sorry, I got a little bit of a lingering like stuffiness in my throat, especially with this weather right now. Okay, so I think the scaling changed a little bit. Replace all uses of scaling with scale mode. Let's go to cube wave. And then fixed horizontal. Not a value. That's weird. Okay, so this is telling me that scaling mode fixed horizontal is not a value. I guess the migration guide might be wrong. So let's go check the docs. Scaling mode. Fixed horizontal. I guess that is a struct now. I missed that. Maybe that was this week. No, it had to have been last week. RC2 went out last week. So now it's the viewport width. Was it always viewport width? I guess it was. And let's get rid of this huge import too. I think this, if I remember correctly, I did these cubes at like 1 block each. So they should be very small. So 10 sounds right. I probably should have made this bigger, but it doesn't really matter. So cool. That's all working. And then what other ones do we have? Let's see. Maybe we just go through them in order. Loving your channel. Been learning Bevy, and yours is a great help. Great. I'm really happy that helps. It's always nice to hear that too. You know? I feel like it's really easy to get lost in like just creating videos and shipping them to like the internet, at which point they disappear into the ether sometimes. No method named delta seconds. I guess we changed to delta secs. Sure, why not? Not the material. The main. And then delta seconds. Yeah, I don't know. I try not to have too many opinions about naming things. But I'm really a person that doesn't... I don't care that things are long if you type them out. I know there's a bunch of people that are very into making things as short as possible. I am not one of them. I think that it's significantly harder to read code than it is to write code. And having shortened versions of things doesn't particularly help. Natural language is truly holding us back. Maybe, I don't know. So this is working now, just a simple function name change. Got to work on the shadows in this example at some point. The shadows look bad. And that's almost certainly just because this is one of the examples that I did a very long time ago at this point. And we didn't have things like PCSS, but also I don't know that I understood the way that shadows worked at the time. So these shadows are a little bit pixely and whatnot. But the dissolve effect is still very cool. Okay, so what's our next one? Fresnel, the Fresnel example. That video is still up on the YouTube channel. This looks like elapsed seconds again. I wonder if that's going to be most of our changes here. Yeah, I'm just not a person who cares about those extra 3 characters. I would rather see this say seconds. But I also don't particularly care either. So this is the Fresnel effect example, which is very cool. There's a whole video on this on the channel. That's what this this folder of demos basically is. It's a bunch of stuff that I created, made some videos about. Let's see. UI material handle. Okay, that would have changed. Yes, the UI stuff didn't change by the time last time we were doing this. So let's go do the UI stuff. UI button shader. Okay, so this is required components changes, at least partially. We'll get the seconds stuff in first because the seconds stuff is easy. So elapsed seconds to elapsed secs. Node bundle doesn't exist anymore, so this will just be a node. And then the style is just in node. So this should all work like that. And then the same thing for our other bundles. So get rid of style, get rid of the extra default, and this should all just slot in. Material node bundle. I'll have to figure out what that has transitioned into. But let's finish up with the node refactors first. You think the change wasn't about shorter text, but about being consistent and using the same thing in all function names? Yeah. But we could have standardized on the longer one too. Like I said, I don't hold, like, I don't care, if that makes sense. Like, if you asked me and I gave my opinion, I would say the longer version is probably better because reading code is more complicated than writing code. And making it easier to read should be a higher priority in general. I don't think those functions get typed very often either. Like we only had 2 of them in this example. Let's see where the pull request is. But it wouldn't surprise me at all. 2022. Aligning public APIs. Yeah, so. I don't know. I don't know that being consistent matters there either. Like there is definitely drift over time. And having them all be the same is like superficially nice. Yeah. Yeah, so there was no justification for it going short or long. I guess, okay, there we go. Rust standard library goes with star sex, I guess. But again, shrug. I don't have any real care about that. Let's see. UI material handle. Defer the migration guide. Let's defer the migration guide to the required component port. Okay, so maybe we need to look at the PR that changed the UI materials. You see Rust Analyzer formatting is working now. Did I mess up? When did my Rust formatter stuff break? Function and variable names are for programmers, not the compiler. Yes, absolutely. Let's see. Required components UI is probably what will get us here. And closed because it'll be a new thing. Oh, we didn't call it that, did we? Oh, migrate UI bundles to required components. Perfect. Yeah, so node bundle deprecated in favor of node, and image and button are deprecated in front of UI and button. So this will probably be the materials change, not the UI change. That feels strange. Okay, so that's the UI bundles. This was node, so let's make sure there's no changes there. I don't think this touched the materials. I think it was going to be a different PR. Let's do material UI. Bevy sprite, there we go. That's this handle at least. And there's the migration guide that went into the migration guide that we saw. Okay, wrap the handle in new wrapper component. Yeah, because handles aren't components anymore. I guess material node bundle no longer exists. So what did material node bundle become is my question. Let's check the draft to see if it's there. Material node, not in the migration guide. I've been holding off on learning UI since you heard it would change a lot soon. Good time to dive in. I think if you were holding off on learning it, the right time to dive in is probably with the stable release when the migration guide and all of that is up to date. All of the examples are up to date, I will say. So you don't really have any issue if you go in here. I would probably start with the release 15 branch because the examples will stay a little bit more stable. Go to the examples folder and check out the UI stuff. All of these examples are up to date with all of the RC release and stuff. All of the docs should also be up to date. So it's not an unreasonable time to dig in. But also keep in mind that if you do it during the RC process, you may be the first person asking a new question. So just be prepared to, like, if you don't understand something and you can't find the answer, ask the question in Discord so that somebody is aware that there is like a piece of documentation that needs to be written or something like that. But otherwise, you should be fine, especially if you've already been using Bevy and stuff. I think the other thing that will be interesting in that sense is the picking stuff went in. So like in this UI button example, they still use a button system with the interaction component. But actually, do we have a UI picking or is picking its own? I think picking is its own. So there's some picking in here. I thought we had the UI picking. I don't remember if we have the UI picking merged in. The meshes got merged in, so technically we would. So did sprites, but yeah, at some point picking is going to be the way to do buttons, and that interaction thing is going to go away. Is this the version that enables async tasks on Wasm? Hopefully. I think it should be. That PR got merged in over a month ago, 2 months ago, 3 months ago. It's been a while. No, that's 2023. But yeah, the async tasks on Wasm thing is something I needed for some woodpecker work I was doing at one point. Okay, so you're saying material node? Is this deprecated? Yes, use material node. Yes, you are correct. Okay, so material node holds the handle to the UI material. And style is not going to be a field on this, right? This is going to be... material node with a handle. And then where do we put style on a material node? Let's check out what the required components are for this. We require node, so we should be able to just put node in here. I think that's going to be one of the things that is going to be tougher than it used to be, especially for newer people. Where like this is material node and the fields for styles are no longer on, you know, material node or whatever that is. And you have to figure out like what component that needs to be and where to put it. And one of the things that I've found is that newer people have a harder time clicking that source button. Node to material node, yeah. In some slice, iter, find, double reference. So you're destructuring the double references. Does it get copied or just dereferenced? I think that depends on whether it can copy or not, right? I guess it has to copy if you're writing it like that. I think it depends is going to be my answer. Because like the copy is kind of implicit if you're dereferencing. So it may or may not happen. But yeah, if you take enough of those shared references off, it does have to be, you know, duplicated or whatever at whatever point. Okay, this needs to be a tuple. And then UI material handle. So this is just going to be a UI material. Is that the new thing? Implements UI material. UI material handle doesn't exist. What is UI material batch? Okay. This just takes a regular handle. I want to go find out what happened to UI material handle. Replace handle UI material component with UI material handle wrapper. And then this probably would have been the PR that removed that change. Yeah. That's interesting. That's not mentioned in the it's not mentioned in the migration. I don't know that it needs to be, specifically because this is a change within the last month or so, which means it was Don't all of the other ones have handle on them though? Or did we change that too in the last like month? I guess not. I guess we removed handle from all of them. Mesh 2D. Yeah, I guess contains the handle. Okay, well, that's fine. Okay, material node, UI material. This just needs to be the handle then. This doesn't need to be UI material. Okay, so then we end up with a spawn for the material node with the handle to the material and a node that contains the other styled stuff. And that should be good. Yeah, things like mesh 3D, mesh 2D, etc. is what I was thinking of. Okay, we still have a style in here. So then we get rid of material node. This is going to be node. And this is going to be what we pull in. We're going to get rid of that material, probably get rid of that default. Put this in here, add our comma, remove a brace, and get rid of bundle. And then figure out why node is not happy. Oh, because it needs to be a tuple as well. Okay, and I think that is it. We'll see if that changes. Okay, so our UI materials are working again. Nice. I need to change the background color in this. I really don't like that gray, now that we have all the Tailwind colors. Okay, so that's UI button. Then we have Raymarch sphere as our next one. And that just looks fine. So I think we're just good there. I guess the other question is, we had some examples that used Bevy Asset Loader. And I guess my question is, Bevy 0.15. What are the chances this actually works at the current moment? Let's first see if they've published an RC. They did not. They also don't publish RCs for previous RCs, so I don't know that they ever will publish an RC. Let's look at the commits. Looks like it's updated to RC2 on this branch, which is great. And we'll need an IS progress fork, which I don't think we use in these examples, so I think we're fine there. So we shouldn't need to explicitly point to that IS progress fork. We should be able to come in here, go for Bevy Asset Loader. If I don't capitalize things, Bevy Asset Loader. This is git equals that URL we just picked up, and branch equals Bevy. I really dislike how less useful GitHub gets when you make it small. Bevy-0-15. Bevy-0-15. Okay, and let's find which one of these examples uses Bevy Asset Loader. That's not crates, that's what examples I called it here. Okay, so we've got 8-way sprites, the Hades start menu. I think I'm going to pull the Hades start menu out into a different place. It uses some assets that are kind of heavy. 8-way sprites, shield with depth. I think the shield spheres is probably the easiest to get started on. Shield spheres, shield with depth. I think shield with depth is the one that we'll do. Did I mess something up? Let's see, shield with depth, cargo toml. This uses shader utils. Bevy basic camera is technically here. Do we have this? Let's see. I think one of the things that's pretty common is that when you're doing upgrades for RC versions, one of the most common pain points is trying to figure out which of your dependencies have already updated for RCs. Oh, look, that's This Week in Bevy. Nice. I think this camera was suggested recently. I don't know if they have a 0.15 version. Doesn't look like they do. That was July 6th. So yeah, they don't have a 0.15 version. So maybe we'll just remove the camera for now. Let's see, camera. So camera controller plugin will comment out. And then depth, camera controller will also comment out. And we'll come back in here and do a new camera. And Bevy basic camera also needs to be commented out. And I think that's it. That tends to be the pattern for all camera crates. Like import it, add the plugin, add the component to your camera. Let's see, shield with depth. And I'm expecting to get some errors here. So this PNG is what it should look like. Should be just a ferrous inside of a shield. The shield should have, if I remember correctly, a vertex shader modifying those points. And then shield with depth. Main. Let's see what we've got. We've got some mesh material 3D changes. We've got single can't be called on query anymore. Did we remove that? I know we introduced the single query type, but let's see, scene root is the new handle wrapper. Colors need to be updated. Mesh 3D. These all seem like straightforward changes to me. I think in there we had a plane change as well. All right, so let's just get into it. I'm expecting Rust Analyzer to show me where the errors are, but it is not. Dang you, Rust Analyzer. These PBR bundles are going to have to change. All right, where's Hex? Hex is here. Hex is on sRGBA these days. There we go. When we saved, we got it. MSAA is a component. It is not a resource anymore. What is the ambient light we're using in the examples these days? This is an ambient light color that I picked, or not picked actually. This is an ambient light color that I just kind of pulled from one of the examples one day. So I think I want to match what they're doing. I think unless I have a strong reason to not do that, It makes it easier when people are looking at the examples. Because then it's like, oh yeah, that's the same as, you know, the Bevy main example or whatever. Orange red comes from the palette of CSS colors. Just check this up here. Yep. Orange underscore red, all caps. Orange, red. And then what do we do to this? This is a init state now. Add collection to loading state is deprecated. Interesting. I think I will try to skip that for the moment. This run if conditional for in state is interesting. I'm assuming that's an issue with the actual toggle prepass view and not actually this condition. This is the prepass output quad. So I think we could change this to be the plugin that we wrote to do prepass debug visualization. So let's see, this is going to be camera 3D. I don't think camera 3D has, it might have stuff on it, now that I think about it. So camera 3D, camera, transform, depth prepass, normal and motion prepass. Bloom settings changed, apparently. What did bloom settings change to? Just bloom. That's one of the other things about this release of Bevy is there's just going to be a lot of renaming of stuff. The renaming of Bevy stuff started very early in 0.15's process. A lot of the functions got renamed. Actually, you could consider it starting in 0.12 because a lot of the shader functions got renamed at the end of 0.14. A lot of shader functions got renamed in 0.14. So bundles are not going away clearly because we have these tuples still, and tuples are technically the bundles. What do we do for PBR? I think this changes into mesh 2D or mesh 3D and what was this one? Material mesh 3D and then transform. Is it mesh material 3D? Mesh material 3D. I've said that in previous streams, but that change will not stick in my head for some reason. Okay, so is there a plane in this example? There is. Plane default mesh size. Plane default mesh size, and then we don't need into. And then do we need to bring plane into scope? Plane 3D. Plane 3D is what it is. Color RGB. That's just deprecated, so we'll leave that for a second. Mesh size. I guess this needs to be both of them. And then this needs to be a tuple. We'll leave this deprecation and we'll clean it up later. And then we need to do the same thing for both of these. So copy these two, paste it in, add some parentheses, the ever important syntax in programming. Get rid of that, change this to a paren. Then we plain default mesh size 5.5. Plain 3D. Material mesh bundle. So this is probably what? Material mesh? No, mesh material. Let's find out. Material mesh bundle is just done. Instead, use the components directly. Okay. And then color blue, that comes from the CSS ones again. I don't love that, but we are using CSS stuff, so I will just continue with that. Scene bundle had a change that I saw in the compiler output. This was scene root, if I remember correctly. Asset handles for scenes and dynamic scenes must be wrapped in scene root or dynamic scene root. That's because we removed component from handle. So we've got to wrap everything now. I know when I say it like that, it just seems like we're doing some arbitrary, like, wrapping for no reason. But I believe that this makes it so that we can actually identify intended uses for different things, which is really useful. One of the interesting things about 0.15 is going to be that the 0.15 changes in general, like required components, they will have some impact where we need to migrate things now, but like required components and retained rendering and things like that really unlock a lot of stuff for like 0.16 plus. So it's an interesting situation because we're going to need to pay some of the migration costs now for nice things in the future. Alt potato, yes. Corgi boyo. How's it going? This needs to be a linear sRGB. Linear RGBA. And then this is a button input. And this query for a handle, that's not going to be a handle anymore. So we've got very few things to change left. The mesh vertex buffer layout change is the change of a name, basically. I think that was actually a previous change. So if we just look at terrible physics with networking as a hellhole of jittering. Yeah. I mean, lag is a hellhole of jittering, isn't it? Mesh vertex buffer layout. This is going to be in the shader examples. And we'll just look at the default custom shader material. Or maybe we won't. What is the do a search here for material pipeline so that we can find this function. And then we'll restrict it. Man, I really dislike that GitHub decides to become less useful magically when you get smaller. Where's the examples folder? Let's do examples shader. And that'll give us specialize, and we can look at specialize, and specialize will give us the mesh vertex buffer layout ref. Mesh vertex buffer layout ref. We aren't actually using it, so it doesn't really matter. Why is that an issue? Interesting. This is for custom material. This is just a regular custom material. Fragment shader, pipeline, render pipeline descriptor, mesh vertex buffer layout ref. This all looks right to me. So what's the issue? Render mesh vertex. Maybe Rust Analyzer was just having some trouble. Oh, Bloom here also needs a change. Yeah, for some reason Rust Analyzer just didn't want to find it. Okay. Pre-pass materials. I want this functionality, but I think we can regain it by using the plugin we built. We've got Bevy pre-pass debug. Will control minus make GitHub window text smaller? Yes. So I can make it bigger and smaller. I keep it big for stream, and then when I keep it big for stream so that people can actually read it, then what happens is GitHub thinks I'm like on a phone and don't want to do anything useful, and it removes functionality from the UI. This is like a multi-year long-standing issue that I have with the GitHub UI. Especially since like I actually do stuff on my phone too. Like, and their app is just not a usable replacement for the website. Okay, so we've got pre-pass debug plugin. What was the example here? Shader, pre-pass debug plugin, custom material. I think that that's all that we need to do. So maybe we just get rid of the toggle entirely. We'll get rid of adding it to the update system here. And then at some point we will add this plugin in here. But I don't know that I want to do that right away. And then we need to fix Bloom as well. Actually, we don't need to fix Bloom. Bloom is fine. So we should run this. You tried looking at the network of a repo on your phone and scrolling horizontally on the network simply does not work. Yeah. Yeah. This dot comment doesn't do anything. Okay, cool. Oh yeah, because I commented the whole thing out. That's kind of annoying, actually, that it prevents me from keeping that there. Undeclared type Bloom. Yeah. And then RGB. Couple intos here that have been scattered around that we don't really need anymore, which is great. I love that. Especially since a lot of that's one of the questions I always have for the workshops. Like, do I use into or do I explicitly wrap things in the struct, like the tuple structs? One of them is very explicit, and one of them is what everybody does in their actual Bevy apps. Okay, this needs to go, I guess, after the plugins, right? This is one of the weird errors that got introduced in 0.14. Too many textures. Perfect. So we do have Ferris and some other stuff. We do not have, I guess, working lights. Specifically, the shader for the shield is also broken. Okay, so let's see the warnings here. Too many textures in mesh pipeline view layout. I think we should be fine on Mac with this warning. We would not, it would concern me more if we were trying to deploy this to WASM or the web. Instance index was removed. Assets, shaders. This is in custom material. Is an instance index a built-in? Not for the way I'm using it here with Bevy. The issue is that Bevy render instance index, the module, is missing. We did make this change in one of the others last week. Which one did we make this change in last week? Was it the dissolve shader? Or was it the... Did I push this up already? I did push this up already. Okay, let's do... Oh, that's in a pull request. That's why. Yeah, so Bevy render instance index, we just removed. Custom material. So we'll just remove that then. And what did we do where we were using it? Because some of this vertex position logic is just copied and pasted from like what Bevy does normally. And we, for the most part, want to keep that. Some of the Weasel stuff might make this a little bit easier. There could be a little bit less copy pasting from like a chunk of code that needs to be there but doesn't need to be modified. This used to be much worse, actually. The standard material used to need like an entire like clone of the struct and all of the logic in the shader. And with the standard material extensions, that got so much easier. Where are the normals? vertex, model matrix. Were we just not handling normals? It's entirely possible. Get world from local. I think I didn't update this function name either. Okay, we use the instance in the model matrix too, which means that basically, oh, they just rename it to vertex no more. Perfect. We basically just want this whole chunk of code there. It's not my favorite to like do it like this, but there are no other modifications being made here. Actually, the vertex positions here is modified. So we might want to go back to the yeah, we use our modified position here, but in this example, we pulled the logic out up here. Position diff and position. And then we just use that in there. So I think actually we would be good. Oh, that's not what I meant to do. And then we don't want this extra stuff here. I think we want the that. Redefinition of vertex. Yeah. Okay, so this is vertex no morph now, which I then need to use as vertex no morph. You did the water plane shader thing for the thing you're doing this week? Nice. How'd that go? Declaration of vertex is recursive. What? You're telling me that I have a problem with naming this variable vertex? That's weird. Okay, let's see if there's anything else in that error. Vertex dot position y goes into diff, so that is not. This needs to be no morph. That's really weird. I mean, as an error message, that's really weird. Is kind of what I'm getting at. I understand why it's happening. We have the usage of the word vertex before we actually have the vertex variable declared, so it's looking for the function name instead, but it should be saying like, hey, you can't use this like that, instead of saying, hey, this is a recursive usage. Weird transformations everywhere for the water plane shader. Okay, so there's our shield. That's what we wanted to see. Unfortunately, we've broken the lights entirely. but the shader for the shield and everything is completely working, which is cool. So let's go back to our Rust and check out the point lights, because I feel like I messed up the migration for the point lights. So maybe I should have paid a little bit more attention to what I was doing here. Point light intensity 1500. Bloom on. There's only the one point light. I feel like that should work. Let's do C10 for point light. So point light intensity shadows transform. That is the file we are currently in. No, that's not actually. Point light bundle. Game uses Y down coordinate system, so an object at Y100 is lower than an object at Y20, so everything needs to have a 180-degree rotation to be Y up. Yeah. Wait, a rotation, or do you mean like a... You mean like just a subtraction, basically, right? Like you want them in the same order. Because a rotation would put the ground on the sky. But really what you want to do is just... Some things are scaled by the ground scale and some things are not scaled. Perfect. That sounds exactly like a game somebody created 10, 20 years ago. Actually, that sounds like a game somebody created today, honestly. Okay, so I'm a little confused as to what the error is here. Bevy Inspector eGUI doesn't have a release yet, does it? There's a Bevy main branch from last year. Is there a pull request? Not for 0.15. Right-handed Y down, Y up, so the game is plus Z away from the camera. Yeah, doing all those translations and stuff is not the most fun. Okay, so we've got Mesh 3D, Mesh Material 3D, Transform. And I have somehow removed either the light from the entire scene using that point light stuff, or I've removed the ability for the meshes to receive light. Is it an issue of the light just being way too small? Let's find out. It is. Okay, so what do we do about that? Let's go check the examples, I guess, in Bevy and see what they're using for point light values. I think they might be using directional lights for the most part. Okay, they don't even actually set that value. So I think we're just going to not set that value. And we'll see what it gives us. Doing the raycast to get the tile of ground, you have comments scattered everywhere. This is in-game coordinates transferring to Bevy coordinate. Yeah, that sounds right. That sounds exactly right. Okay, so the issue for us in this point light situation was actually just that I think the value of the intensity was far too small. Because we're using a single point light to light this entire scene. But our shader with the vertex modifications pulled in from GLTF and stuff like that is all working, which is wonderful. The camera is not working because we removed the camera, so I can't pan around or anything, but generally happy with that. Let's add that. Tiny Glade is on Steam already? Yeah, I have it installed. I've played it. Tiny Glade is amazing. The one thing to note about Tiny Glade is that they built their own renderer, because Tiny Glade started on Bevy, I want to say 0.6. And they have very heavy rendering expertise on their team. I think they have a small team, but they are rendering experts. So one of the benefits of Bevy is actually that you can replace the renderer. It sounds really weird to people who aren't used to video games, because it's like, why would you want to replace the renderer? And then if you talk to people who are like deep in video games, they're like, wow, you can just replace the renderer? But yeah, Tiny Glade is a Bevy game. It uses Bevy ECS. It doesn't use the Bevy renderer. And the reason for that is that they started at 0.6 and had a lot of rendering expertise. So they built a lot of their own technology. They are contributing some of that technology back to the Bevy renderer, which is really dope. They replaced it, I believe. I don't actually know the answer to that specifically, but I believe they replaced it. And the reason I don't know the answer is because I haven't seen their code and I haven't seen them say we replaced it or modified it. But there's a bunch of like ray tracing and stuff in Tiny Glade. So I would say that like for certain classes of games, Bevy is fine, like it's good. For other classes of games, there are probably better options. For example, if you're going to build like the next 2D platformer, maybe use Godot. You know, 2D platformer is not like rendering intensive. You don't need to do any like deep rendering internals or any like very custom stuff. It's kind of just like you have a 2D character controller that needs to work really well. And then the rest of the 2D platformer is really art more than anything else, right? So like Bevy doesn't really help you with that part of it, creating the artwork for, you know, a 2D platformer world. I mean, we'll see about what happens in the future and whatever, but like, yeah, I would say there are classes of games for which Bevy is a great option. There are also classes of games where maybe you want to use something else currently. And Bevy has a great relationship with like Godot and stuff. So like you should never see any Bevy devs or any Bevy users being like, oh yeah, use Bevy for everything. Forget about everything else. There's a very like collaborative relationship in terms of like, yeah, if Bevy doesn't work for you, then definitely go use Godot or something like that. It's pretty cool that you can just take out the renderer and make your own. Yeah. And people do that. People do that for fun too. Especially like doing ray tracing stuff or whatnot. You're using Godot in a big using Godot in a big performance that is having lots of units. You think it's because of the node system. You'd assume Bevy would give more freedom to optimize. Yeah, Bevy is also pretty because of the ECS and the way Bevy is structured. Having a lot of things is something that Bevy is very good at, right? Having a lot of things that you need to crunch on in tight loops is something that an ECS is very good at. You made a dating sim in 7 hours to learn Bevy to try out the ECS stuff. Was very cool and pretty intuitive. Nice. I'm glad it worked out for you. Yeah, I like Bevy. I think Bevy has a really bright future. There are definitely, like I said, classes of games for which Bevy is cool to use right now. But that will only grow over the next 5 years, you know. Yarn Spinner, yes. I have been intending to use Yarn Spinner for a while now. I look at it all the time and I go, dang, I would really like to use this. And it has the Rust integration. I think Jan maintains it, which is great. You feel like 2D platformers can definitely be very artistically complex. People just haven't done much of that yet. I feel like they do a lot of that, though. I guess if you're doing like a very basic intro level 2D platformer, maybe not. But I mean, if you look at the art for even Hollow Knight's a 2D platformer, right? Hollow Knight is gorgeous, right? What's the one with the little white glowy character that I can't remember off the top of my head? Nope, not going to remember it. Ori, yeah, Ori in the Blind Forest. Ori is also gorgeous, right? Like, I feel like 2D platformers, the ones that are like well known, are really artistic, right? If you do a lot of really beautiful art and also your controls and stuff are good, then you're good, right? Like that is, well, I don't like, you're good in the sense that like you have a chance. But if you like, I don't know, use Kenny's assets, for example, like Kenny's assets are great, absolutely wonderful. But if you took one of these packs and you tried to ship like this as a game, it probably wouldn't land very well. If you're spending more time writing code than using the Godot editor UI, you guess you should try Bevy. Interesting. The one thing about Bevy that is really important to know is if you're trying to target consoles, Bevy is not going to help you there. You can get a Bevy game running on a Steam Deck. You can't get it running currently on like a Switch or a PS5 or an Xbox, I don't think. You're making a pixel-based top-down game. Is there a nice way to adjust the render order in Bevy for the y-axis? You can do ordering however you want, really. There is a switch target. Is that still being worked on? I know that there was like the very basics got merged in. Oh, Jam is on this, right? I forgot about that. So like there are people working on stuff and whatnot. You can do whatever you want for sorting for render order and stuff. I don't know what your requirements are, so I can't tell you if there's a nice way to do what you want to do or not. But the 2D pipeline inside of Bevy actually has a depth pass as of 0.15. So you can actually do per pixel depth sorting in any way that you want to. How's the workflow with 3D animations in Bevy? Not as good as some other things. So Bevy has gotten some significant improvements in 0.15. See, let me pull up the Bevy example. There are two things about 3D that I would mention, especially relating to animations. One is that like Bevy works fine with GLTF exports from like Blender and whatnot. But Bevy doesn't have an editor. So you're going to be either working in Blender, exporting to GLTF, and then writing code to get it into Bevy, or you're going to be or you're going to be using something like Blenvy, which comes with a different set of constraints. Let's see, Bevy. Let's pull to make sure that these are up to date. Ooh, what changes do I have locally? Oh yeah. Git pull. Cargo run. Example. Animated Fox. We'll go with animated Fox. I need to update. Am I really that far? Oh, I'm only one version behind. Anyway, I'm not going to update cargo, I don't think. Not on stream anyway. They do have the examples on the web too, though. Examples. This won't be the current version. In the current version, there's mesh particles that are triggered by animation events whenever this Fox runs. And the animation blending and things like that and bone masking really got a huge jump up in 0.15. But before that, it was a little bit harder to work with. So I would definitely like, if heavy animation is going to be a thing that you care about, definitely look into that early and make sure it works for you. You can target bones and stuff like that. Absolutely. You're currently making an N64 ROM in Rust. Nice. There's some work to make Bevy no standard and hopefully end up running it on retro consoles. You found Bevy UI pretty neat due to your web development experience. Flexbox for the win. Would you suggest something else to make the UI? I would not currently suggest anything else to make the UI. I think that you should run with Bevy UI as much as you can. And then if you find a use case that really doesn't work for you or something like that, then consider other options, right? I say that because Bevy UI is probably the only UI library you can guarantee will be updated to the next version and updated timely and etc. There are other UI libraries. There's like Woodpecker, for example, which I've contributed to, which are interesting technically and interesting different approaches. There's also Quill and Reactor and a bunch of other projects as well. But if you're going to build something and maintain it over a number of Bevy versions, Bevy UI is going to be the version of UI that is going to be maintained guaranteed over those versions. So like, if you don't want to maintain a crate, if you don't want to end up responsible for like the UI crate you choose or whatever, I have heard of Linux, yeah. Then definitely stick with Bevy UI as long as possible. Yeah, this example got significantly better in 0.15. Are there talks of integrating an editor into the UI? Yes, absolutely. Bevy editor prototypes. There's a whole repo, actually. This repo is a repo that contains basically a whole bunch of prototyping for building an editor for Bevy and what that means. And there's a design doc. I think there's a website here. Your connection was interrupted. Oh. There's like a vision doc and then like a roadmap for what stage 0 looks like, what stage 1 looks like, etc. So yes, people are working on editor. The intent is also to use Bevy UI to build it, so Bevy UI gets better over time through dogfooding that, etc. Yeah, Bevy on retro consoles would be amazing. Right now, you're having trouble implementing a simple physics engine. Yeah, I mean physics engines are complicated. I wouldn't call a physics engine simple. yeah, Linux is really cool. Linux is another one of those things where it's like, it's very cool. It's somebody's project, and if it fits for what you need it for, then wonderful. Like it's world space UI kind of based stuff, right? If you need that, Bevy Linux is very cool. But it is maintained by, you know, a person, and not the team of people that work on Bevy, for example. So if you choose a third-party UI library, any of them, not Linux specifically, you have to be ready to kind of like contribute and or potentially maintain that library in the future. Same with any open source, really. 0.15 looks like a pretty huge improvement in a bunch of areas, huh? Yes. Well, so Bevy releases tend to be very big in terms of like, hey, everything got significantly better. If you look at the past releases, which are all still up here, so like Bevy 0.14, Bevy 0.14, meshlets, virtual geometry, like nanite got introduced. It's experimental. Screen space reflections, depth of field, per object motion blur, fog and lighting, volumetric, which also got more improvements in 0.15. Color grading, anisotropy, auto exposure, animation blending started here. Hooks and observers landed in 0.14. Those are huge. There was a rework of colors and states and a whole bunch of other stuff. Like, oh, this is the meshlets demo. This is effectively nanite from Unreal Engine, which is just so cool. It's still under an experimental flag. There's still a lot of work going into it, but it's very cool. Missed the stream for past few weeks. Always so many juicy nuggets. Yeah, I am feeling better. Still got a little bit of a, you know, throat thing, but nowhere near as bad as last week. Last week I woke up and I was like, wow, talking for 4 hours straight is not the right way to heal my throat. But today is fine. Yeah, so Bevy releases are pretty big, typically. Not big in the sense of like gigantic or whatever, but big in the sense of like there are real serious improvements every version. Okay, so we just did not animated Fox, cargo run. We just did the depth, shield with depth. And that's all working now. So we should be able to translate that to do some of these other shield examples. I gotta check out your streams more often, getting a lot of nice nuggets to hear. Oh, I'm glad. Happy to hear that. You know how you were talking about having to do transformations everywhere to get the things from the game's coordinate system to Bevy coordinate. So for anybody who isn't aware, Hukasu's doing like a conversion of a really old game to like a modern Bevy PBR flow. So they're doing basically translations from that game's coordinate system that they chose, you know, a number of years ago, into Bevy's coordinate system and stuff like that. The UV of the water plane is inverted. Yeah, I could see that happening. Oh, you still have no idea how to use hooks and observers? Well, let me introduce you to the video I made about hooks and observers. Hopefully I don't. Oh, come on. I don't want to see a political ad when I'm trying to show the video. Anyway. let me find that and get the link. I do wish it was a little bit easier to find my own content. Video link, copy link. Here you go. That is hooks and observers as of they were when they launched in 0.14. There are a couple things that are new that are awesome. We're getting bubbling events, which I actually mentioned in the video. We're getting bubbling events in 0.15. And I think picking is using observers now. So observers are still improving as well, but that's a really good like base overview. Okay, one of these shield spheres probably. Let's try that one. You saw that video like 3 times, but it just went over your head. If you have more questions, you can either leave them in the comments or leave them in the live stream here. I'm happy to cover them, you know? While this compiles, I'm gonna pour myself some more water because I'm empty and I need to do that. So give me like 60 seconds and I will be back. All right. What came first, the hook or the observer? Basically the same time. Fundamentally, they're basically the same thing. The difference between hooks and observers is that hooks you can't add custom events to, so they get to optimize that in the runtime, and basically they can, as a result, run in more tightly constrained environments inside of Bevy, because they don't need to check to see if there's custom events or anything like that. You're making an isometric game, right? So what is different from a perspective and orthographic view in terms of gameplay and game dev? What is different? So I just really tend to like the viewpoint that you get from isometric games. And the difference is really that with actually also the current 3D game that I was working on is actually a perspective camera. Hacked to be very, very, very far away and look like an orthographic camera, which is also mildly confusing. Let's get the image here, not the... This is the result of an isometric projection, right? So the... this is gonna start that game immediately, isn't it? The idea is that it's usually used for technical illustration, like buildings and stuff like that, where you want to be able to see all three sides of this cube, like on the left-hand side here. Technically speaking, the isometric projection used in games is not a true isometric projection, so it's a little off. But that's so that you can do things like go 2 pixels over and 1 pixel up when you're making pixel-based art in an isometric fashion. But I just really like the visual effect of looking at things like this. Let's see, the wear cleaner. Let's see, open this image. So like this is kind of the same thing. And I really like the aesthetic of being able to see a little bit more. Isometric is also used a little bit more in like strategy games, things where you need to see more of the field. So from a gameplay perspective, if you're doing something where people need to see a lot of stuff on the map, isometric can be a good choice. And then perspective is basically just like how you view everyday worlds or everyday life, you know? It's got depth of field and things further away are blurrier and smaller and all of that kind of thing. But the game that really got me into that like kind of 2D isometric vibe is really Hades. And I enjoyed Hades so much that this just kind of stuck with me in the back of my head. I really like the layout of this. And then what's the new one from starts with a W. Windswept, maybe? No, I'm blanking on the name. Windblown, thank you. But Windblown has a very kind of like similar aesthetic, but is in 3D, which is also very, like I like the look of these games in general. So that's why I choose it for the things that I like to work on. Let's see. Can't seem to find any API documentation on the Bevy site about GLSL or shaders. Is there any support for custom shaders? There's a lot of support for custom shaders. From the high level to the low level. So the place that I would send you to look at shaders is, again, the Bevy examples. You won't be writing GLSL, you'll be writing WGSL. If you go down to the shader section of the Bevy examples, there's a whole bunch of examples for shader material will be a basic shader material, and it'll send you to WGSL in the shaders folder to look at the actual like shader code for that and how to set up a material and apply it to an object and stuff like that. And then if you want to integrate a little bit more with Bevy's like PBR rendering, you can extend the standard material also using shaders. And this will show you how to do that. And that'll allow you to do things like react to the lighting automatically without having to write your own, et cetera, et cetera. But yes, the API documentation for WGSL tends to be a little bit less. Actually, I would generally consider shaders to be tough no matter what. I don't think that there is a really good like how to write shaders resource out there. It's one of the things on my list that I would like to get to at some point. But you may find yourself like in the spec like this, looking for like, oh, how does, you know, texture load work? Or like, how do I sample something or whatever, and reading some of this stuff, which, you know, doesn't work for some people, and I understand that, but yeah. There's also, there is a document, if you go into the Bevy Discord, there is documentation for the functions that Bevy offers for shaders and stuff like that. But it's, you're going to have to go into like the rendering dev channel to find that link. I think it's in the pinned posts. Let's say you're making a footstep system that needs to track a bunch of vecs to know when to play a sound. Which one would fit here? Event readers, hooks, or observers? Probably observers or event readers, depending on your use case. And it really depends on what you mean by a lot. Right? I think that performance-wise, if you are truly working with a lot of things that you need to crunch through, event readers are going to let you batch that, and observers are not going to let you batch that. That is the main difference. And the only way you'll know whether that matters for your use case or not is to measure it. So it's either going to be event readers or observers. I would probably start with observers, personally. But if you know ahead of time that you're just going to be crunching through a lot of things that look very similar, event readers will let you batch them. 3D top-down shooter game seems like isometric is better for viewing the enemy. Yeah, so if you are trying to get a really, if you're trying to give the player a good view of a wide section of the field, isometric can be really good for that. Orthographic kind of flattens out the world, where perspective bends it to mimic our eyes. Yeah, a little bit like that. So like orthographic, everything's going to look, you know, the same size more or less. And perspective, things are going to get smaller as they go, you know, away from the camera. I guess you're the camera, so it would be that way. But also made with Bevy? No, the games I was talking about a second ago did not, or not. Writing shaders is way harder than Godot. Yeah, like I said, shaders are really tough. For some reason, we're like still stuck in 1980s for like shaders and how we debug them and stuff like that, compared to CPU-based languages. It's really wild. But if you end up writing any significant amount of shaders, you're going to end up using like render doc, for example, which is like very clearly not a, you know, user-friendly UI, I guess is the way that I would frame it. It's very intense, as are like the other debuggers, like if you're using Xcode or whatever. One thing you need for your project is per instance shader parameters. Yeah. I mean, that works. Yeah, the game you're porting implemented DX9 last year. Sick. But yeah, the one thing I will say is if you are writing shaders and you're writing shaders in Bevy specifically, the people in the rendering channel in the Discord are so helpful. So if you run into issues, ask questions in the rendering Discord, or in the rendering channel in the Bevy Discord. And they're just very helpful. It's so funny that stuff like math functions can give different outputs based on GPU. Yeah, I mean, I think that's true for anything that's multi-platform, right? Even websites, right? You can't even rely on CSS to behave the same between two platforms or two browsers. So like, how is a GPU manufacturer supposed to match somebody else? All right, shield spheres. Get rid of that. I guess get rid of that. sRGB. a hex into Oh, you mean CSS stuff? The CSS stuff I was talking about? Is that what y'all are exclaiming about? When should a shader be used instead of a texture on a mesh? I don't know that there's a hard answer for that. You know, like I think that if you're doing things dynamically and you need to do processing live, then shaders are obviously the answer. But like, if you're trying to do something in a shader that you can render to a texture that you can then scroll in a shader, you know, like, it's not one or the other in my mind either, right? Like, texture is data for a shader. So like, I get what you're saying, which is like, oh, like I have a cube and thus I have a texture and I want to apply it to the cube. But like, at the end of the day, you're really using shaders to render that anyway. You're just like at that very basic usage level, kind of ignoring the fact that there are shaders involved. But one thing I will say is, like, if you have something, let's say you were doing some kind of noise generation that was really complicated and for some reason really expensive, you might want to render that out to a texture ahead of time. And instead of doing the computation live, use that texture to do a lookup. And you can get performance wins that way. What happened to shader utils, by the way? You only found some repo that hasn't been updated in a year and doesn't work on current versions. I probably just forgot to publish it, honestly. That's actually the repo I'm working on right now. That has shader utils in it. I thought I published for 0.14. Oh, I guess I didn't. Huh. That's my bad. I thought I published for 0.14. I guess I didn't push that up. If you ever see that up and you're like, hey, I wanted to use that and it's not up, just feel free to ping me and I'll just publish it, because I have a lot going on and sometimes I forget things. But it is updated for 0.15 right now, actually. So whenever the release candidate finishes out, I'll publish the 0.15 version. How are the compilation times? Never used for us, but heard it can take a while to compile programs. Maybe Bevy has compiler optimizations. Yes. So Rust has a whole set of like optimizations that it does if you run a production build, right? It's not what I wanted. I want the cheat book. Bevy cheat book compile. Bevy on different platforms. That's not what I want. Programming patterns. I thought it was in here somewhere. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's, yeah, okay. So there's a performance page in the Bevy cheat book that goes over some of the changes you can make to the configuration. You can go from building in dev to building in release, to anywhere in between those two things. And in dev, you can even go further and use something like Dexterous Developer is, I think, the name of the crate, which is actually an experimental like hot reload system. So there's a lot of answers to this question. One is that things like shaders should be able to hot reload anyway, right? They should just when you change them, they should change in your game while it's running, and it doesn't need to recompile or anything like that. Developer builds will happen faster than release builds. If you use something like Dexterous Developer, or if you use the shared library linking approach in the Bevy docs, those will both make compile times better. But if you do any of the basic optimizations, my understanding is that it is not that different from like Unity. From people who are doing like production Unity work and production work with other engines, those people are saying that the compilation times are not actually that different. I don't do production Unity work, so like that's not like I don't have that experience. But the people who do are saying that it's like not different for like a production game. Even though Bevy is early in development, you're surprised how many developers are playing around with it and contributing. Yeah, it's growing quite a bit actually. They do a list of how many PRs landed. Actually, we don't even need to open this. So in 0.12, 185 contributors, we'll call it 600 pull requests. In 13, 200 contributors, 700 pull requests. In 14, 250 contributors, 1,000 pull requests. And I expect that to go up again for 0.15. So there's this like definite curve for more and more people are contributing, more and more pull requests are going in, more and more things are landing. I don't know how long that will grow for, but it is definitely one of the things that is very interesting about Bevy at the moment. But yeah, if I ever don't publish like a crate like this, like Bevy Shader Utils, anybody can ping me and I will publish it. Don't feel like you can't ask me to do that. Will Bevy have native built-in UI? It does currently. Let's see. We should be able to fix this up. This looks a little bit... There's some deprecated things in here that I see. How big of a difference has required components made for UI work right now? Well, it's a little bit hard to answer that because I haven't been doing like it's not months after the release, if that makes sense. It does make some interesting changes, especially for like the amount of code you need to write to do UI stuff. I think that The answer to that question for me is that BSN, or the Bevy scene notation, is going to have a larger impact on stuff like that, even though required components feels pretty big. And required components is really the first step to getting to the Bevy scene notation. So in my mind, the current state of things, it has changed, it's gotten better. Required components is an improvement over bundles. But I know it's not the end state, so I'm not thinking about it in that way, right? Like, I'm not being like, oh, required components makes Bevy UI so much nicer or anything. I'm thinking, wow, required components really enables BSN to do what will be significantly nicer. You think Bevy has a better core foundation than Godot, needs more time to cook, the editors and prototype phase? Yeah, editors and prototype phase. The editor is going to be a deal breaker for a lot of people, right? And I think that's totally reasonable. Bevy right now caters to people who know how to program. But that's not like the goal of Bevy, right? Bevy will always keep its modular nature, its ability to write the code like you can write it today. But it's also very important to sort of speak to the people who are more artist sided, more production sided, you know, like the people who want to do something in Blender and then see it running in Bevy, or do something in, you know, some editor and see it working in Bevy, or doing level design and things like that. I think that is top of mind for the Bevy maintainers as Bevy moves forward into the future. But like people are saying, the editor's in prototype stage right now. So like, it would be unreasonable for me to say Bevy matches Unreal for editor interaction. You know, that's just not true. This one is a little bit older than it used to be. Let's comment this stuff out for a second. Let's see. Camera 3D, transform, tuple. I think this example in particular. Shader utils 2021. Bevy asset loader.workspace equals true. Iter tools. That's why this one took so long to compile. That was so weird. Okay. Because this was trying to pull in a custom version of Bevy asset loader. That was why. Yeah, you know to code, but having no editor is indeed a deal breaker for you. Bevy is a game engine and shouldn't be required to know how to code. Yeah, I think that is the general gist of the people who maintain Bevy. That is the way that people are thinking about it, you know? It is not good that Bevy currently doesn't have an editor. I think everybody agrees with that, and that supporting, you know, artist-based workflows is very, very important. That's part of why Assets v2 got so much work put into it. So it's definitely not like, it's not something people are ignoring, is kind of what I want to get across. People know that this is an issue. People know that this is a thing that has to happen if Bevy is going to gain adoption in the wider game engine market, you know? Let's see. Let's start with the paren mesh 3D mesh material 3D. Cool. You can't see Bevy ever being completely separate from Rust unless there's some visual scripting they want to add in the future. Yeah, I mean, scripting is a conversation. It's, I think, a future conversation. But there are people working on scripting currently and experimenting with it and what it would look like. What was I going to do? I was going to go for the, what is it called? BRP. You know, GitHub, you could just show me the pull requests and not. This PR went in 0.15. And part of the reason this is interesting is because it's required for the editor work. So the editor that people are working on uses or will use the Bevy remote protocol. Night, Roberto. The editor people are prototyping right now will use the Bevy remote protocol, which is basically a web server plugin inside of Bevy that exposes information and the ability to modify a running Bevy app. So you say, yeah, you can't see it being separate from Rust, but here's an example of being able to query an HTTP server to modify components and query for components over an HTTP request using any language. And you can do that with any 0.15 application now. You just need to add the Bevy remote protocol plugin and it'll set up this web server for you and it'll just go, right? You can just use it. So people are definitely of the mind that things like this are necessary, right? Yeah, I could see how you would have the opinion that Bevy today is kind of more for people who are looking for niche use cases or specific kinds of performance. I don't think that's true long term, right? I want to take a step back there. I think that there will always be the space for the experienced programmer that wants, you know, high performance and, you know, you'll be able to replace the renderer if you really want to and all of that kind of stuff. Bevy's going to keep all of that stuff as it moves forward. But there is basically no support for somebody that doesn't want to code at all today. And that needs to increase, right? So when we have this conversation, it's basically like the Bevy project knows that that needs to increase and is going to put effort into increasing the ability for people who have more artistic backgrounds to work with Bevy games. And I think that that is true. I think that that needs to happen over time. It doesn't need to be like a no code game engine by any means, but it absolutely needs to be able to support people who are building, you know, models in Blender so that they can see those models running inside of their Bevy game without needing to write some Rust. You know, that needs to happen. And that's not just for people who are like artistically minded and don't know how to code. That is also for teams who will have people who are specialized in their domain, right? And a 3D modeler or an animation person needs to be able to do their work and also interact with Bevy. So it's not just for beginners. It's not just for people who like don't know how to program or whatever. It is also for all of that. We renamed this to what? Q is the new command. Instead of add, it's commands.q. Just a simple rename. It's confusing to me that camera 3D doesn't want to. Linear RGB, time, color texture, alpha mode. This is delta sex. Handles are no longer components, so this needs to be mesh material 3D. Custom material? Yeah. And then impl command. I don't think write exists anymore. I think that's apply now. And this is material mesh doesn't exist anymore. This is mesh 3D. I think this example probably actually gets updated. I'm seeing a couple of things that I would probably move to maybe scene root or something like that in the future, but we'll see. So now the material itself is the component instead of the handle. Damn. So basically what's happening here, are you familiar with new types or the phrase like new type? What's happening here is that handle doesn't implement component anymore. So what this actually looks like if I type out the full thing is the type is something like this. So it's a material mesh material 3D, which is new typing the handle. And the handle is taking a type argument of custom material. So it's this, right? Was there a specific reason they did this? Yes, because the stance of the Bevy project currently, as of this change especially, is that components aren't just data, but they are placed for specific behaviors as well, right? So in this case, mesh material 3D, right? You can think of other meshes that shouldn't be rendered, for example, right? A navigation mesh, for example, should not be rendered or could be optionally rendered, but shouldn't always be rendered. So if I was going to insert a handle to a mesh, right? I might want it to be navigation mesh, right? With a handle to a mesh inside of it. And that will say for my systems that are querying for this, they can now query for navigation mesh instead of querying for all handles to meshes. And it makes it easier to grab the things that you're supposed to be operating on rather than grabbing all data of this type. So the overall thing here is that the new types are good for this kind of, there is some data here and also you should treat it like this kind of application. And the general trend is away from things that are just data. So having a handle to a mesh, you can only have one handle to a mesh if it's a component on an entity, right? So if you wanted to add a second mesh to that for some reason, you just can't because the handle was a component. Now I could actually add mesh 3D and right next to it, I don't know why I would do this specifically, but like a navigation mesh with a different mesh, right? That's the overall like vibe of that change. That's so nice, actually. You just had to deal with having to grab a specific kind of material. Yeah. There's also like improvements that people want to do to the like experience of 2D in Bevy. So like a transform 2D, for example. A collider mesh would be, I would say, potentially yes. But the way that most of the collision libraries like Avian handle those components is actually not like that. I don't know what the required components version of Avian is going to look like. I haven't looked into that yet. This is for Bevy. Let's do Avian. But like currently, it does command spawn collider sphere 0.5, right? So as of today, we're not actually sticking meshes in here, and also that's the way that whatchamacallit works as well. Rapier. So yes, you can absolutely. But also, the major physics libraries, as far as I know, do not do that. It looks like there is a version here that is benches, examples, snapshots. Source. There we go. The setup of these crates is also very interesting because they basically build them into 2D and 3D versions. Where's colliders? Actually, let's just look at the PR. It looks like they're just doing a 0.15 update, actually. It doesn't look like they've implemented required components changes in this update specifically, which is pretty good, honestly. That is an approach that a lot of people take when updating libraries. They first do an update to the next version of Bevy, and then they do a version that uses the new features of that version, which makes it easier for people who are consuming those libraries to update from like 0.14 to 0.15 without needing to do a massive migration. And then they can choose over the next like 3 months to do, you know, an upgrade to the required components version of Avian. I know that they are doing some experiments with the required component stuff because they've been responsible for doing a bunch of the required components PRs as well. Yeah, here we go. It'll be in here somewhere. I wonder if they've updated the examples. Let's do 3D examples. All updated yesterday. It looks like they're keeping the examples up to date, which is very cool. So let's take a look at cubes. So this is the ground cube mesh, mesh 3D, mesh material 3D, and then they still are using collider cuboid. So yeah. Yeah, get it compiling, then get fancy. Then get it compiling, then do the new features. Maybe updating to required components would take a bit more time given that collision is handled by Parry. Yeah, but no components are handled by Parry. as far as I'm aware. Right? Like the logic is, but not the components. The components are all avian. Also, they're way ahead of the game. It's worth mentioning. They are like, they've been working with required components for weeks now, and are responsible for a bunch of the required components PRs that went in. What does a scene bundle turn into? The scene components directly. So this is scene root and transform. John Dolph was also talking about changing a bunch of defaults for required components in the Discord. Yeah. Yeah, they were very, very involved with the required components migrations, which is great. Let's just pull the directional light from one of these examples. I feel like I should almost have like a generic setup for some of these examples. But at the same time, I think it's easier to read if they're contained, self-contained. Where's the lighting example? Okay, directional light and transform. So we're basically just getting rid of that. I guess we're using the defaults, so why not? Transform, get rid of that, do this, save, and all the stuff goes away. Feels like there's an issue with custom material. I think that this particular example in the repo was a little bit older than other ones. So let's make sure that we get the right as bind group definition here. And this is basically just a bunch of derives, which is why I'm going and grabbing the list and copy and pasting it over. Okay, animate light direction. Camera 3D still an issue for some reason. That's a weird one, which is why I'm avoiding it. This is already the mesh material 3D. That goes there. Add systems. This is going to be an update. Run. Got any suggestions for where to start making your first 3D Bevy game? Are there resources that are up to date? Let's say I just read the Rust book. I would start with the Bevy examples. Go to Bevy examples, go to 3D, and take a look at the stuff in this directory. This will give you a whole bunch of different things. Specifically, the ones that you're going to want to start to look at are 3D shapes if you've just started. because this will show you how to actually add some kind of thing into the world. And then you're probably going to end up at some point wanting things like physics, right? And if you do, then the other crates that you would use, like AV and 3D, also have examples that you should go look at. Like this cubes example that we were just looking at has, you know, default plugins, the physics plugins, how to spawn something in, and then how to set up the colliders. And these will also have different things like control systems in them occasionally and stuff like that. So that's where I would start. I would start playing with the examples, start finding the things that you want to actually do from those examples, and just start piecing together your own little demos. Obviously, I don't know what kind of game you wanted to make, so that's just kind of like a general suggestion for somebody who has just stopped or just read the Rust book and whatnot and wants to get into a little bit more. Okay, I think we cleaned up all of the build issues, but we still need to update Bevy Asset Loader for this demo, so I'm expecting that this will not run yet. Because I'm expecting that these assets will not load because I've commented out the loading. So we've got the background here, which is great. And now we need to probably take the same thing we did here. So I'm just going to bring this up. And then add loading state looks fine to me. And then this is on enter. I'm not updating the Bevy Asset Loader API yet. I know that these two are deprecated functions, but I'll do another pass for cleanup. Okay, and that loads in. I don't see any of the shield spheres. I think that's because the shader is broken. But there's a lot of ferrets here. I think I should probably download an updated version of that Ferris GLTF at some point. Okay, so the shader. Oh dang! I dragged that out into a completely different window. That's hilarious. I forgot you could do that. The crab army is ready. I think it's a dance party, right? That's what crabs do. Crabs dance. So we've got this custom material that we need to update. Actually, this is the one that, no, that's not what I wanted to do. Oh, dang. Okay, cool. Let's grab this and pull it out. VS Code not wanting to cooperate. Okay, so this is shield with depth. We need to get into shield spheres, and I believe these shaders are either very similar or almost exactly the same, if I remember correctly. Vertex shader. So my guess is that this would actually work if I just completely copied and pasted it, which it didn't. So I got to figure out what the change was there. Pre-pass depth is unavailable. Interesting. Is that because I didn't add the depth to this other one? Let's take a little bit more of a closer look at the code that we wrote for this one. Great news. What's the great news? Position diff, yada yada. Yeah, I think the issue there is just that vertex position, there's no depth in these calculations. Oh, the title of my stream. Okay, yeah. That makes sense. Yeah, the release candidates have actually been out for like a week, maybe a week and a half. But I actually didn't stream last weekend, so. Okay, this is all the same, and then oh, did I open the wrong file? I think I did. No, I didn't. You know what I did do though is I replaced the entire file. And in one of these examples, I did the vertex shader only. And then the other example, I did the entire, like I did the fragment shader as well. So that's the change that needs to be made. No, it's not. What am I doing? I'm not keeping track very well right now of like which file I actually have open and which one I need to change. Okay, that's the change that needs to be made, right? And then Bevy shader utils is probably something I wasn't using there. So I need to add that in, right? That's shield with depth. The other one is this one. It should have that. What am I doing is a question I find myself asking myself quite frequently. Thanks. You're thinking of trying out Bevy and was wondering about the best way to import Blender models and set up a basic character to run around in game. Yeah, exporting GLTF and importing that is probably the most straightforward way. There's an example in the Bevy repo called Animated Fox that does something very similar. That is probably what you would want to look at. Because this is the first time you're using it, that's what I'm going to suggest. But also know that there is a plugin for tighter integration between Blender and Bevy called Blenvy. But caution, it is currently in an alpha state. So once you get a little bit more comfortable with how things actually work and you start going, oh, I wish I had a little bit of a tighter integration, then look into this. But start with the Blender to GLTF, import GLTF into Bevy workflow, which will be a little bit more manual, but you'll see a little bit more about what actually happens and how to deal with that. Okay, so shield spheres, vertex shader, the mock for now is in the custom. I don't remember using that in the other one. I think did I get rid of that function? That's a great question. Oh, the Fresnel isn't even used? Oh, no, there it is. Okay. I was gonna... Yeah, okay. Let's look at the custom material here. What am I doing for the custom material with the depth? Oh, I renamed it for now, didn't I? Yeah, Bevy shader utils for now. And then simplex noise. So some of my imports here are just a little off, is all this is. I'm looking forward to the Weasel work to make some of these imports and providing functions like this a little bit easier. Oh, it's 3D. That's why. I can never remember the functions names that I give them. And then this is globals. Globals is going to come from one of the Bevy imports. You'd like to play with very simple cellular automata, 2D. Do you have a getting started tutorial or other suggestion that would put you on the road? It depends on how you want to do the cellular automata. And I say that because the example that I believe the Bevy repo includes is actually a compute shader. So if you are interested in starting to learn how to use compute shaders, they have Game of Life as a compute shader. But beware, the example for the Game of Life compute shader, there are fewer abstractions for creating compute shaders than there are for creating materials. So the materials, like trait, is very high level, very fairly easy to use comparatively. Whereas the compute shader setup requires you to drop down into just below that level of abstraction. And you'll have to get a little bit more close to the fact that the render world exists, for example. As someone who just did the opposite order of those steps with Blenvy versus doing it manually, the advice was superb and you'd wish you'd followed it a couple months ago. Blenvy is great, but you really wish you'd known what you were doing before letting it do it for you so you understood how to deal with the wrinkles it introduced. Yeah, definitely. I think that Blenvy is a really great tool, especially for people who already know how Bevy works, right? And want that little extra level of integration. But it is harder to figure out when things go wrong. And Blenvy is still technically in an alpha, right? It doesn't have a full release yet. So suggesting it to people who are new is something I want to do in the future, but not something that I can do right now. I don't think. That said, people do whatever they want and run into any issues they run into, and that's just how people work. So, you know. And I do think Blenvy is great. Blenvy is really, really, really cool. Okay, we need the globals identifier. That's going to come from an import mesh view bindings, looks like, from Bevy PBR. I don't think we need view, but maybe we do. Right, and then I need to change mock for now to actually just for now. And we do need view, the thing I just literally removed from the imports. Ooh, that's fun. What just happened? Okay. Error matching shader stages, shader requirements against the pipeline, handling WGPU as an error by default. Float 32 interpolated as a perspective with sampling center is not provided by previous stage outputs. Okay. So I need to make some modifications here. We do have, I think time is being manually provided in this example, if I remember correctly. Yeah. So time is being manually provided in this example, and I actually don't want to do that. So I think we can leave these actually, those uniforms. But we don't need to provide time anymore. It used to be a thing that we had to do, but today we don't need to inside of Bevy shaders. Bevy has direct access in shaders to the current time or the elapsed time. So that's not something we need to do anymore. And we are not fetching it here, and we are not fetching it here either, as far as I can tell. So hopefully that makes that error go away. Not gonna lie, learning Rust and Bevy at the same time has been a bit challenging, but you do love the language and the engine. Yeah, learning any two new things at the same time is definitely going to be more challenging than learning just one, right? I think that Rust and Bevy, Rust is a great language and Bevy is a great game engine. But definitely learning how to do Rust and also how to do game development is absolutely harder than just learning one or the other. I do think that Bevy helps you learn Rust. I think that the way systems are set up to be small increments of functionality is really, really nice, especially for learning Rust, especially for not getting into the problem of like creating some God object and trying to share mutable references all over the place. Bevy kind of like guides you away from doing that, which is really nice. Base color texture. I think these are 2s now, actually. Let's see where the... Actually, now that I think about it, does this even need those? I don't think we're even using these textures. Yeah. So we're just going to get rid of these, actually. We don't even need those. Which means that our code gets simpler, too. This goes... Oh, that's not what I wanted. Shield spheres. This is the plain mesh. Okay. So color texture can go away, which we shouldn't be setting anyway. The kind of error you're seeing right here is definitely one of the harder errors to debug when it comes to shaders. What eventually happens is that basically, if you haven't seen WGPU and you don't know how shaders work, some data is provided to those shaders. And what happens is basically the data is provided to the vertex shader, which then provides data that is then provided to the fragment shader that then produces a color. And what we're seeing here is basically like that pipeline. The data requirements and the data that was provided don't match. You used to do C to make your own engine while working at your previous job, so it helped to get quickly into Rust. ECS is a cool way to compose everything, though. Yeah, I do really like the ECS pattern in general. I think that it fits my brain a lot better than creating like large, like, I don't know, God object characters or something, you know? I feel like when I see more object-oriented games built with like enemies and stuff, I see a lot of copying stuff around and whatnot. I see a lot of like, oh, this is a, you know, this turret is an enemy, but then it's not the same kind of enemy as this other kind of turret, and thus I need to override things and etc. Right? I like that you can just add the behavior that you want to that entity, and you don't actually need to do that like, I inherited from this, therefore I need to override it because it's not actually that kind of thing. And you can still make quote nodes by making your own bundles that has all the components. Yeah. And that's what required components is too, right? So like transform, for example, with the required component stuff, will also add global transform as a component to this entity, but I don't need to care about that. And yes, you can still make an enemy bundle that has transform, collision, etc. Or just a function that does it, or whatever. Any way you want to do it, right? Okay, so let me take a look at this. So this is the one that works. Position, world position, normal. My guess is that mesh vertex output is front, is all we have here. Group 1 binding 0. That's, why did I put that down there? I'm pretty sure that's not supposed to be down there. We aren't using the material here. That's really interesting. ECS is hard to grasp for people that come from object-oriented programming, but from experience, object-oriented programming is not suited for large-scale game dev. Yes, so the people who say, for example, that Rust is hard to learn are people who are unlearning other languages to learn Rust, if that makes sense. Like true beginners that haven't programmed before don't have the same problems that people who have learned a language that is not like Rust have when they're trying to learn Rust. Like true beginners who have never programmed before don't run into the same hurdles. And the issue is that basically you've built up this mental model of how things work in this other language, and you have to, for your second language, unlearn a lot of that, or learn that not all languages are the same, right? I think you get past that once you start getting to like 3 and 4 languages. But especially for people who really only know one well, it can be tough to unlearn some of that. Have you tried Bevy Gaussian splatting at all? I got it running with Bevy OXR. I'll release some examples soon. That's pretty cool. I haven't used Gaussian splatting at all. It's not an area that interests me all that much, so I haven't put a lot of effort into it. If people show off starting to make like game environments with it and stuff like that, maybe I'll take another look. But other than that, I think that the technology itself is just not it's not interesting enough to capture the time that I spend on, you know, everything else. Impl default is so nice to make it easy to spawn new things, or having a method that makes it with custom positions. Yeah. The impl blocks, impl default, deriving things, all very, very nice aspects of Rust for sure. You learned Rust directly after Python and never did much C++. Bevy was your intro to Rust, and honestly, you think Bevy makes Rust easier and even higher level. Yes, definitely agree with that. Yeah, Bevy makes the most awkward part of Rust, the borrow checker, almost a non-issue. Yep, totally. Yeah, I think that one of the reasons that I do Bevy workshops is not necessarily because I want to teach people game development specifically, but because I think that games are actually a really great way to learn Rust. I think that the way Bevy sets up everything gives you an architecture that gives you a good environment in which to learn Rust. Whereas I don't know that, you know, other things do as much. Pattern matching is so good. I don't want to use a future language that doesn't have pattern matching. Similar, like sum and product types are like structs and enums that carry data. I don't want to use a language in the future that doesn't have like data carrying structs and enums. Pasted a link to a video about it on Discord. Cool. Appreciate that. For the ray tracing and Gaussian splatting. Nice. Okay, we're not using like the vast majority of these. So let's just start getting rid of some of these. Because if we don't need them, then why do we have them, right? Let me pull this out. And this is in the fragment. Show it here. This only uses front facing and the vertex output. And in here, we're using world position and the diff. What do we have for vertex output? We're doing world position, world normal, ifdex UVs, vertex tangents, vertex colors. And then we need to change the diff position because that's 6, not 5. I think that's actually the issue that we were running into specifically. It was an error message about the interpolation. Float 32 interpolated as perspective. And I think, yep, location 5 is the location at which we were having that. So I believe the issue we were actually running into is that in this shader, this vertex output instance index shader def guards location in memory number 5 to interpolate in a specific way the instance index, which doesn't work if you're not using it like as it's supposed to be used. You think Gaussian splatting will be good for photorealistic avatars? The next goal you have is to use the particles and rig them to the character avatar rigs, since particle morphs are easy. Yeah, I mean, that'll be really interesting. I assume you're going to put that in the showcase channel when you get it working. But yeah, I think I'm definitely interested in seeing people apply it in like use cases, you know, like things that are actually relevant to me, you know, going to make a game, or I guess you're doing OXR, so that is what, virtual reality stuff, if I remember correctly. So yeah, it makes sense that you would be focused on character avatar rigs. But I'm definitely interested in seeing people like use it for things that I could then take and build games out of and stuff like that. Um, but the technology itself is pretty far down on my list of stuff to care about at the moment. Redefinition of UV in shader 19. I don't see a redefinition of UV. Vertex output. I think I was in the wrong file. Yeah, there we go. There we go. Now we have rainbow shielded Ferrises with hexagon GLTFs. Vertex displacement for the vertices in the shield, and colored through that fragment shader. And then I think we have a light animating around in a circular fashion, if I remember correctly, which is very cool. Shield spheres. One of the things I intend to do with this set of examples is clean them up a little bit more and turn them into more of a teaching tool, something that people can look at and go, oh yeah, that's how I would do XYZ. Right now, a lot of them, or some of the older ones especially, have like commented out code from when I was figuring things out, you know, a year or two ago or whatever it was. So that's always like, I want to make them a little bit more pointed and useful. Nice Ferris field. Thanks, Stompfather. Droidic Army. This is the, what? Who has the droids in Star Wars? I don't even remember. This is the clone droid army or whatever. Just a bunch of Ferrises rolling forward, ready to dance on you. That's what we really need. I need to code up the crab rave animation for Ferris and put that into an example. Okay, so that's shield spheres. What else do we have here? There's a couple things here. 8-way sprites could be interesting now that we have that set up. That's not how you spell 8. 8-way sprites. So one of the things that I did with the 2D isometric stuff that I was doing was I coded not just an 8-way sprite, but a 32 or like arbitrary direction sprite. Because I was rendering out 3D models to 2D sprite sheets or texture atlases, and then using those in a 2D environment, which was very cool. So this demo was built out of an early version of that code. Let's make sure that we're using the right things here. Workspace, workspace. Seldom state might not have an update. That would not make this as easy as it could be. I don't know if they've done RC work on this yet. Doesn't look like it. So I think that that actually is not a good example to update yet. So let's just back out the changes I started making and not do the 8-way sprites until later. This will require, it looks like, seldom state and leafwing input manager. I could probably change it to not rely on those. But I'm probably not going to change it to not rely on those right now. Yeah. The logic for the state machine isn't that terrible. It's not that like daunting or anything to change, but probably clean that up a little bit too when I change that. Cool. So I think that for those examples, I'm reasonably happy with that for the moment. I think one of the other things that I want to do on stream today is actually start a 2048 0.15 version. So to do that, I guess I'll go into active. I'll clone Rust Adventure 2048. I think it's just 2048. Maybe it's Bevy 2048. It's just 2048. Why didn't that work? Oh well. Let's move this from 2048 to do 2048 0.15. We'll check out 0.14. And then Bevy 0.15. And the reason this is a good candidate is because, not the lock file, is because it doesn't really have any dependencies. So we can do 0.15 RC2. Easings will not be included. Some other things that are allowed. Why is that? Oh, .0 RC2. Actually, I can run this to show what it is before we actually do it. So this will be a fresh build. This is literally just 2048. So I think that there are a number of changes I want to make to this workshop, especially in 0.15. New features and some new looks. What's new? A fresh design and new animations. 2048 plus. Only Amazon Prime? What? Okay, interesting that they've changed this. But this is the game. You just go back and forth and you merge tiles of similar scores. I think with the curve stuff, it could be cool to replicate that, actually, that design. This is the version that we have going for 0.14 right now. I think I'm going to get rid of all of the sprite work in this as well. I think I've decided that sprites should be their own workshop. So I think I'm going to remove the sprite work here, and I'm going to start focusing these workshops on specific techniques. So for 2048, that means that this is basically the first workshop in like a chain of turn-based games. And the point of 2048 is going to be more that you can run a schedule that you add stuff to, more than anything else. But this, you know, end, start, whatever. I'm not going to replicate the new stuff they have. I think I'm just going to keep it with the old stuff. But I'll probably change up the design a little bit too. It's cool to know that this was updated though, because I would not have realized that if I didn't go to the site. So let's get this working in 0.15 before we do any updates to it. 0.15.0, RC.2, get rid of Bevy easings. Rand and iter tools don't get updates that often. All of that UI is going to change, and then the easings plugin and the easings are things that are going to have to change. So this is getting the entity and inserting a transform that eases to a specific location. But instead of that, to start out with, what we're going to do is just get rid of that. And we'll make it super easy for the moment and just say that we're going to use the same logic roughly and insert this transform. So then when we run this, this should just basically lock immediately to the different locations that it needs to go to. But there will be a number of updates that we need to make. Not necessarily in the logic, but inside of how we render things. Oh, we changed that to add observer. That's interesting. Camera 2D. I don't think Camera 2D has anything on it. We may need to do transform, get rid of the default, add a paren here, add a paren there. Scaling mode needs to get viewport height. And then I guess we included all of the orthographic projection stuff there already. That's interesting. I'm going to wait for the compile to tell me that I did that correctly. But so this texture is going to be I think an image on the sprite these days. We're going to remove that texture later anyway, but I'm curious to see what it's supposed to be to start out with. The most dangerous droid units in Star Wars. Okay, I think that's all set. And then this is sprite, color, transform, default brace commands.q. Text sections is something I want to come back to because the text handling changed fairly significantly. And there's a bunch of other changes that I can make much easier first. Get rid of this. Get rid of that. Get rid of this. Get rid of that. And then the text bundles, I guess we'll come back to again. This will be Q. I wonder if this test still runs in 0.15. I hope it does. Okay, so that leaves us, I think, with just the text stuff. Today you learned UI scale exists and can scale your UI with the resolution. Yes, it absolutely can. Text2D bundle is no longer a thing. So let's find out what Text2D bundle is moving to, because the cosmic text stuff got merged, as well as the required component stuff. So this is just going to be text now. Text layout, text font, and text color. Okay. Text bundles, node flags field when turned into a different component. Okay. Text2D's additional fields turned into bounds and anchor, which we're not using. So this should just be a text2D then. And this is going to be a tuple, it looks like. And text style is going to go in like this. I don't know what we do with justify yet, so I'm going to leave it there. Text section 0.value equals foo is pain. Did that get better? Can you make your own component? That got better. I'll show you in a second. We're gonna cover that in a second. But that changed for sure. Whether it got better, I guess, is up to you, but it definitely changed. All span entities, so all of those sections can now be their own components, or their own entities, is rather what I should say. Text layout, text font, and text color. So text font, then text color, and text layout, justify, and line break. Oh, those are new. Nice. Or justify isn't, but justify text center is what we want. Line break is fine. We still need to set the color. Text font is apparently not what I thought it was. So let's go find what that looks like. Font size. Oh, sweet. This is, okay, so font size 40, and then font smoothing, which I didn't add the right number of commas to. Okay. That's, you know, I can go back and forth on that. Was there a regression on Rust Analyzer? You feel like it's struggling to keep up with changes to the code. I haven't noticed one, but I also don't update my stuff all that often. I definitely do not like continuously update every day. So I don't know. I am not currently experiencing one, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist, is kind of what I'm saying. Okay, so this has changed as well. So text sections were removed in favor of hierarchy-based approach for root text entities with text 2D. Child entities with text span will act as additional text sections. To still access text spans by index, you can use the reader and writers. So if we wanted to transform this directly, I believe we use writer. That will be probably in a PR. Let's check the docs first, I guess. Yeah, this doesn't have that much of a demo. Here we go. So it's in breakout. Score root looks for a single query entity with scoreboard UI and text, and then the writer is still using the index like this. So if we were going to do it like that, straightforwardly, this is the code that we would have seen. This is a query for points and children. This is a query for text. I think this is text 2D now. No, it's just text. Scoreboard UI transform with tile text. And then we need the writer as well. This isn't necessarily the thing that I want to do. Just to be clear, I'm making an incremental update and then I'm making the other update that I want to happen. So in that case, I think we're at 0 here. Writer, text. What is score root in this example? Score root is that single query. Oh, that's really interesting. Did we implement deref for single? That's really interesting. Okay, that's the entity ID anyway. It's not the text. So we need the entity here, not the text. Single is new. Yeah. Single. It's query. If you've ever done a query and then you wrote .single, it is the capital Q query version of writing .single effectively. So yeah, single is new. Single is effectively like I could do single like this instead of query. Text entity. I guess this tiles is actually enough for us. We don't need to do this little like get mute thing anymore. Because this is trying to dive into the tiles by children to find the text entity. And the setup here is that we have the tile and then the child is the text. and points is on the parent container. So I think we still need to do this little first thing. And then the text entity then is not actually necessary because we already have that in entity. So we don't actually need to even do that because the entity already comes in with the other thing here. And then score is points value to string. So not a huge improvement with the kind of lateral move that we did here. But I do believe that we could change this to be a component on the section, and then we wouldn't need to use that index. But we're going to run with an incremental step forward for now, and then we'll update it probably later. Let's see, default here. So this, I'm gonna sneeze. Oof. One of those like, the sneeze is coming, but there's nothing you can do about it. Okay, so that's all UI stuff. I want to look for the orthographic projection issue that we're running into here. That is all in UI, and then is orthographic at the end? Yeah. Oh, default is not satisfied for... It's not even implemented. That's really interesting. Oh, you know why? Because orthographic projection has the new 2D function on it now. Default 2D. There we go. And now we don't need to do near and far, which is so much nicer. Because that was a thing that tripped people up a lot, like needing to reset the clipping planes, especially when going with 2D like that. Okay, so main is now set. Now what we need to do is set up all of this other UI stuff. So text sections is going to make the same change that we just made before. We do that in a couple places. And then we've got a couple of components that we need to take the bundles away from. And then that looks pretty much like it. So it should be a pretty straightforward migration here. Is this UI text is a question I have though. Or is this just text? Text bundle and text 2D bundle were in favor of text. So I think it's just text. We don't have text style anymore. We have text layout, which we actually don't need to set. We have text color. Which we set to white. We have text. Is it text font? That feels really weird to write text font. It is text font. We'll get default in here, and the font will be our UI assets font. And this will be a font size, and then we'll get rid of text style. So overall, not bad, especially for simple usage. I like the simple usage better. So like I could just write text here when I'm like scaffolding something out and then add the colors and stuff later and not even have to worry about them. Okay, image bundle. UI image. And these go on Node, I think. And UI image is texture. It doesn't like that for some reason. Probably because I don't really need to intuit anymore. Let's find out. Text bundle, UI image does not have texture. I think that is image now. I think they changed it in a different PR. Cool, and then this is text. We'll default this. And this will be text color, right? Oh, the justify too is the other thing we need to do. Text color. This. Text layout. Justify center. And then get rid of that, and that all formats. Is this Linux or Mac OS? What kind of window management solution do you use? It looks very neat. I use UI, and it's Mac OS. So this is the repo. It's wonderful. I really like it. It's not for everybody. Not everybody loves it, but I really like it. I use it mainly for the tiling behavior that you see here. I really like the tiling behavior. I really like having the tiling behavior, especially for videos, but also just in general. Let's see, font size. A little bit of a manual upgrade here. See, that's the same as what I just wrote, so I'll just copy pasta. Cool. And then those I think are going to be almost literally the same. Let's see, we used best and score here. Cool. Just remember to retype this as best. Unfortunately, no strong widget behavior in Bevy currently. So abstracting that into a component as I would normally do is not necessarily the way that this ends up working. Let's get this spawn in here, and this is panel green and otherwise the same. And then node bundle, we get rid of style. Adding the children there. Button bundle, button is new. Style needs to go into node. Is this going to be UI image? Yeah, it is. I like that better than the way that I wrote it before. So I'm going to come back up here and do UI image from the image. Cool. And then we're back into text again. Let's do this node one down here first. The node is going to be just ever so slightly faster. Cool. And then this is our last bundle to update. So this is going to be text. And then we've got the typical text font. Rust Analyzer is not happy with me at the moment. Text font, text style. Let's grab these two things and put them in this because we know they exist there. Get rid of that. Get rid of that. Add a comma. Rust format. I saw an into there that was unnecessary, so just checking to see if I have any others that are unnecessary. And then we have the text writer changes. So the text writer changes are this and the entity that we want to write to. So this, then, we want the entity here. And we end up with writer text like this here. I do think, again, we can clean this up a little bit, but I'm not too worried about it for the moment. I'm just doing an incremental until the application starts working again. So we'll need text writer and we'll need this writing logic again for the other sections that are going to need to be updated. And this one is going to be score best. And these are going to be text entity. And these are going to change to be entity. And I don't see any errors. So all we've done is fixed all the compile errors, basically. And then we do have a runtime panic. Query does mat. query does not match with components transform global text 2D. So the question is, which system is that? Tile text. So that's this. So text transform with tile text and with text. Is tile text on the thing that we need? Text 2D here. Do we need to query for text 2D? Text access 343 and render tile points. So we're still running into an issue here. Maybe this is one indexed. That would be kind of weird. Panic, render tile points, unwrap on a none value. And that's in the text access. So it is related to this writer. So let's see. This entity is the first child. This text. Do we need to rewrite this query is my question. So right now what we're doing is we're getting the child of the entity that we have, which should be, as of the last implementation, the text entity, because there's only one child. If we go look at the tile text and where it's being inserted, we have a world spawn for the tile itself and all of its components, which includes the points. And then we have a child here with children, only a single spawn with text 2D and tile text. So tile text, if we look for this, should be the right thing as far as I'm aware. The only other explanation that I can think of is that this is running too early, which is possible. Let's comment out the writer for a second. And, oh, you know what the problem is? That's a text UI writer. This is a text 2D writer, right? That's the... Okay, what is it? This is text 2D writer. Yeah, so we do need it to be a text 2D writer. And then we can put this back to 1. That seems to have done it. So the issue was that wow, the text looks so different. That's wild. So what we just did with all the text stuff is partially because Bevy now uses cosmic text to render its text. And I don't know if y'all can see that, but to me, this text rendering looks significantly different. I think it's better, just to be clear, but it is definitely different. But that's the whole thing. That is updated, ready to go. Everything's good. So I'm going to push this as a 0.15 version. This is not the 0.15 version. Let's do cargo clippy first too. Okay, cool. Nothing. This is a 0.15 version of 2048. It is not the 0.15 version I'm going to make the workshop for. That's all pushed up though, if anybody is curious about the code that we just wrote. If anybody can't find it, I can dump a link if they're interested. So there's a bunch of questions here still, I think. The text 2D writer isn't necessarily the way that I want to do this. I do feel like because we have the tile text on this already, we can put the tile text directly on the section that we want to update. Oh, right. Link's also available in the GitHub updates because I did set up that automation. You're absolutely right. And I think, thank you for reminding me about that, honestly. And I think that this should work. It's possible it won't. Yeah, there we go. That's the Discord. Yeah, and the links for the commits I just made are definitely in the GitHub updates channel if you're interested in that sort of thing. I am interested in updating this text stuff. I don't know if going directly for the text is going to be the right move. I do kind of like the idea of inverting the control here. So instead of going from tile with points component down to children to find the right text to write and then writing into the right section, I think because Bevy just added like separate entities for these sections, we could apply that component to that section, look for all of the text that has that section that needs to be updated, and then actually iter ancestors to find the points value somewhere above it. I think that's actually probably better. Because that also gets us currently in the current implementation, it is restricted to being kind of this implicit contract, right? So for the tile text specifically, we have this implicit contract where we spawn in an entity. It has some components, including the points, and then the children of that, of which there are only one, is the text we want to update. That is just something that is kind of like held in implicit knowledge for this program. And I would love to explicitly identify that and not rely on it being something specific like that. Let's also run this cargo test. I actually don't know if this test is going to pass. It does. Sick. So there's also a section in here about how to like test to see if someone can win the game, because getting to the win state is actually kind of a pain. Getting all the way to getting 2048 is kind of a pain. You could write out a bunch of commands and like do kind of more of an integration test where you input key codes, let it run for the frame, and do that until you win. But that then you have to figure out how, like, a win condition, right? So what I do for this test is I actually just spawn all of the tiles in on the board using minimal plugins and stuff like that. And then in this case, where that's the spawning logic, we do the update, we run the state transition, and then we should get a game over if there are no more moves. So this test is actually an example, I think, of a really useful test for this game. I don't have tests all over the place. I don't have tests for like tiles merging or shifting or doing all things like that. I have tests for things that are hard to get to as a player, right? If you are a player and you get to the end of the game, you should be able to get a game over if there are no more moves. And I don't want to sit here and tap for, 1,000 key codes every time I want to test that condition. So one good example of a test that works really well. And I don't have tests for anything else because I don't need them. Because if the game runs and I move the tiles, then it works, right? I could write more tests, but I don't think that's the point of the workshop either. Okay, so the text writing stuff I want to look into. The other thing I think I want to do is this game currently runs all the time. And I think what I've decided is that this game in particular, while running an update works and is fine, I think this whole section of systems could run in its own schedule. And then instead of running them all the time, you run them only when there's player input. And then this workshop is focused on the idea that you can build your own schedule. And I take all the ancillary parts out. So I move all of the sprite logic and adding sprites and picking colors and, things that are irrelevant. We don't talk about those as much. And that'll make it easier for me to maintain more of these workshops with more focused goals. I'll also remove some of the UI stuff and stuff like that, I think. But yeah, I think that's it for today. This is about my stream length. So thanks to everyone who's still hanging in there. And I will see you next weekend. Have a great rest of your day.